Welcome to Summoner's Rift. Seconds until minions spawn. Minions have spawned.
Justice is served without causing further harm. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.
Double kill.
34-year-old Korean couple Mr. Hall and Haeyoung had only been married for 3 months. From the outside, it looked like a happy beginning. A young couple, a new home, a future ahead of them. But behind closed doors, something much darker was in view. And one ordinary evening, it ended with a young woman found dead in her own home. Her husband, the only witness. At first, it seemed like a sudden tragic death. But when the truth started to surface, it revealed a completely different story. This is the case of Haeyoung, a young woman whose dreams of a happy marriage ended in betrayal and tragedy. A few years ago in India, I made a huge mistake. Instead of buying a SIM card safely at the airport, for some reason I figured I'd grab one near my hotel. That was a bad idea. Some guy on the street offered me, led me down a sketchy alley, and scammed me. The SIM card didn't work. I was stranded, no internet, no maps, no way to get a ride. That is why this time when I'm heading to Japan, I'm doing it the smart way, because now I know safety. One of the biggest headaches in traveling is staying connected. Panic searching for Wi-Fi, standing in long lines for SIM cards, or risking shady sellers. No thanks. So before even getting on the plane, I downloaded the Saily app. I picked Japan as the country, chose the 5 GB plan, and one more thing. You have to enter the discount code DARKASIA at checkout. Now, checked out, done. As soon as I land, the eSIM activates automatically, and I'm online instantly, ready to check maps, book a ride, text my family, whatever I need. And their plans are way cheaper than traditional SIM cards. So if you want to avoid the mess I went through, download the Saily app today and use my exclusive code DARKASIA for 15% off. Or just scan the QR code on the screen right now. And don't forget to use DARKASIA at checkout. So don't risk getting scammed or stranded like me. Just get Saily and travel smart. Alright, let's get back to today's story. Mr. Saw's voice trembled through the phone, barely holding itself together as he delivered the news. His wife was dead. On the other end of the line, his mother-in-law was stunned. She couldn't even process the words. Her mind rejected them outright. Why would her daughter, her healthy, happy daughter Haeyoung, suddenly be gone? But no matter how many times she asked, the only thing that came back was false sobs, his voice sinking deeper into despair. 3 months into their marriage, just 3 months, and now Haeyoung was gone. And it had happened inside the very home where their new life together had barely begun. The whole nightmare started on March 13th. 2025, Kangseogu Seoul. Seo had called emergency services, saying he had just come home from work and found his wife not breathing. When police and paramedics rushed over, they found her already lifeless. There were no signs of injury, no hints of underlying disease. A young, healthy woman dead without knowing. The shock rippled through everyone who heard the news. No one could understand. How could someone like Haeyoung, who had been so full of life just days ago, suddenly die without a trace? The police at the scene didn't immediately accept the situation at face value. They began asking careful, pointed questions that made it clear that they already considered the possibility that Seo himself might be involved. Rather than focusing solely on what had happened to Haeyoung, they were closely watching his behavior, searching for any inconsistencies in his story. Seo, sensing the shift in their tone, grew visibly nervous. His voice trembled as he tried to defend himself, insisting he hadn't done anything wrong, and questioned why he was being treated as a suspect. But to the opposite, his reaction only deepened their suspicions. Instead of showing raw grief or panic for his wife, Seo seemed far more concerned with clearing his own name. From that moment on, the police quietly marked him as someone they needed to investigate more closely. What had really happened to her? Let's go back to 3 months earlier, when everything seemed so hopeful. They had known each other for less than a year before getting married, a decision that, at the time, felt like a celebration of young love. According to Haeyoung's mother, the two had first met around the same time the previous year. They were both 33 years old at the time. She recalled that her initial impression of Seo had been positive. She had advised her daughter to take things slowly, to date for at least 2 years before considering marriage. But seeing how deeply Haeyoung cared for him, she eventually gave him her blessing, thinking that if they truly loved each other, that was enough. At the time of their wedding, Haeyoung had dreamed of a happy marriage, a future filled with love and companionship. But reality quickly shattered those dreams. Life with Seo was nothing like she had imagined. From the beginning, there were troubling signs. Saul displayed behavior that was anything but normal. Behavior that stripped away any chance at a peaceful, ordinary marriage. He demanded sex constantly, without regard for Haeyoung's feelings or condition. Even the day before she miscarried, he forced himself on her. And after the miscarriage, even after she underwent painful surgery and struggled through recovery, Saul continued to pressure her for sex, as if nothing had happened. Friends would later recall that Haeyoung had often described her husband in chilling terms. She told people that it felt like she had married a psychopath. At the time, maybe those around her thought she was just venting out her frustration. But looking back, those words hit differently now, like a warning no one had understood until it was far too late. It wasn't just isolated incidents here and there. When friends described Saul's behavior, a clear pattern emerged: obsessive control. He would blow up her phone with calls and texts, even while they were out together. He demanded to know where she was going, when she was leaving, and exactly when she would be back. If she made plans with her friends, she would be visibly anxious days in advance, worried about how Saul might react. This wasn't just a difficult marriage. It wasn't a case of two people struggling to adjust to each other's habits. This was something far more suffocating, far more dangerous. A relationship where fear, pressure, and control replaced any trace of love. Outwardly, Saul seemed like a polite, caring husband, but beneath that facade, he often showed signs that he couldn't control his emotions. One place where the dark side surfaced the most was behind the wheel. Whenever he got into an argument with him while driving, it was like flipping a switch. He would suddenly speed up recklessly or slam on the brakes without warning, using the car itself as a weapon to terrify her. It wasn't just anger, it was behavior that bordered on threatening her life. Haeyoung's older sister later said that Saul had seemed off from the very beginning. Even when they were just dating, he would come over to Haeyoung's place and stay for days without leaving. And when her sister visited, he would call constantly, checking in over and over, as if making sure he knew exactly where she was and who she was with. It wasn't affection. It was surveillance. It was control. He treated Haeyoung like she was something he owned. At first, maybe Haeyoung tried to convince herself it was love. Maybe she thought his clinginess was just another form of devotion. But over time, that love twisted into surveillance. That surveillance parted into control. And that control escalated into violence. It's hard not to wonder if Saul ever truly loved her at all, or if from the start it was only about domination and possession. What made it even more terrifying was that Saul seemed completely unaware that there was anything wrong with the way he acted. Whenever conflicts broke out between him and Haeyoung, he would turn to her mother for sympathy, saying things like, "I just love her too much. Haeyoung just doesn't understand." He tried to convince her mother that his behavior was rooted in love, that he deserved forgiveness. And sometimes, under that pressure, her mother would call Haeyoung and ask her to give him another chance, pleading that he promised it would never happen again. Through this endless cycle of manipulation and excuses, Haeyoung was pulled deeper and deeper into a relationship she might never have escaped, until one day it ended with her sudden, unexplained death. But at one point, no one had hard evidence tying Saul to her death. No bruises, no clear signs of gunshot. There was no reason for him to harm her. And could it really happen just 3 months into their marriage, during what should have been their honeymoon phase? That doubt hung heavy in the air, and so her funeral was set in motion. But even during the funeral, Saul's behavior didn't sit right with people. At first, he wailed loudly, throwing himself into a public display of grief. But almost as suddenly, he would go completely quiet, sitting calmly as if nothing had happened. And when he went back home, Instead of being lost in mourning, he busied himself with packing up small personal items. His socks, a phone charger, a razor, gathering them up neatly and carefully as if he was preparing for a casual trip, not returning to a home where his wife had just died. It was hard to believe he had just lost someone he claimed to love. Most people in that kind of raw grief can barely even stand upright, let alone think about mundane things like packing their socks. But Saul was different. But just when everyone thought the tragedy was moving quietly toward closure, someone unexpected arrived at the funeral hall. It happened on March 15th, only one day after Hail's memorial altar had been set up. Police officers walked into the funeral home, stern, purposeful, and headed straight for Saul. Right there, in front of grieving family members and friends, they identified Saul as the prime suspect in the arrest, and they arrested him on the spot. What shocked everyone even more was Saul's reaction. He simply turned to his mother-in-law, smiled lightly as if he were heading out on an errand, and said, "I will be back." No sign of panic, no desperation, just a casual, almost cheerful demeanor, as if he hadn't just been accused of murdering his wife. It was a moment that felt impossible to comprehend. During police questioning, Saul eventually confessed to the crime. It turned out that there were marks on Hail's neck, clear signs of strangulation. When officers confronted him with this evidence, Saul broke down and admitted to killing her. He tried to explain it away, claiming he had acted impulsively after drinking when Hail refused to have sex with him. But the more the investigators looked into his story, the more the pieces didn't add up. Because the truth was, there were clear signs that this wasn't just a man of uncontrolled anger. There were deliberate actions taken to cover his tracks after the fact, actions that made it impossible to believe it was purely impulsive. First, after killing Hail, Saul removed the SIM card from her phone. If this had been a tragic accident, why would his first instinct be to tamper with the phone? It suggested he was trying to erase something, messages, fights, or evidence of what their relationship had really been like. And that wasn't the only thing. Investigators later found that right after Hail's death, Saul deleted the home security camera app from their devices. There had been a home camera installed inside their apartment, but instead of preserving any footage that might explain what happened, he made sure the app was gone. By the time anyone could have checked the records, the system had already been wiped clean. Deleting the HomeCam app wasn't the act of someone overwhelmed by grief or panic. It was the act of someone who knew he needed to erase any traces of what had really happened inside that home. This wasn't just a tragic mistake. It was a deliberate cover-up, clear evidence that after taking her life, Saul was focused not on saving her, but on saving himself. And as the investigation continued, even more chilling details surfaced. Hail's mother came forward and shared what had happened after her daughter's death. She had asked Saul if she could visit the newlywed home to see the place where her daughter had lived. Saul refused, saying he was too scared to go back. When the mother insisted, asking at least for the door password, Saul came up with excuses, claiming strangers had already cleared everything out, that there was nothing left to see. It was obvious that he didn't want her stepping inside that apartment. He was desperate to keep her out. But Hail's mother wouldn't back down. Eventually, Saul had no choice but to accompany her. When they arrived, Saul's behavior once again set off alarm bells. Instead of guiding her through the home or mourning the loss, he hovered nervously around the kitchen, pacing back and forth, avoiding eye contact, visibly unsettled. At the time, maybe it could have been mistaken for grief or trauma, but looking back now, it's clear what was really happening. Saul wasn't mourning the loss of his life. He was standing inside the scene of his crime, anxious, restless, terrified of what might still be them. In the end, police formally handed Saul's case over to the prosecutors on March 20th, charging him with murder. And just a few weeks later, on April 8th, the Seoul Southern District Prosecutor's Office officially keeping him behind bars as the investigation continued. After Haeyoung's death, her grieving family found themselves trapped in endless questions. Why hadn't they seen through Seol's mask sooner? Why had they realized that the kindness he showed was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie? Even now, those unanswered questions continue to tear on their hearts. Seol remains in custody as the case moves forward. Right now, the legal battle is focused on one crucial point. Was this a crime of passion or was it premeditated murder? If prosecutors can prove it was planned, Seol faces a much harsher sentence. Seol, of course, insists it was impulsive, desperate to avoid the heavier punishment that would come with a murder conviction. But looking at his actions, it's hard to believe that this was anything but calculated. In fact, Seol displayed all the cold, emotionless traits often seen in classic South Korean behavior. And despite their overwhelming grief, Haeyoung's family made a heartbreaking decision after her death, a decision that no family should ever encounter. They chose to release Haeyoung's photo to the public. It was a painful choice, but they wanted to make sure the world knew who Haeyoung was, not just a faceless victim, but a real person who had lived, loved, and cried out for help long before her life was stolen away. By sharing her face, they hoped to shine a light on the truth of what had happened. Normally, under Korean law, the identities of victims are protected, and their faces are not revealed. But this time, the family stepped forward themselves, sending her photos to the media, determined to expose the injustice of her death. Meanwhile, Seol's face, the face of the man who took her life, remains protected by law. The public isn't allowed to see it. And that has sparked outrage across South Korea, with many questioning how a murderer could still be shielded while his victim's face is left to carry the burden. Through it all, Haeyoung's family continues to speak out. They say Haeyoung wasn't just a silent victim. Before her death, she sent countless warning signs, subtle cries for help that went unnoticed by everyone around her. And because no one realized the danger in time, they couldn't save her. Now her family is determined to make sure the world listens. They want people to know this wasn't just a case of domestic violence. This wasn't just a tragic argument spun out of control. It was something far more chilling. Another psychopathic crime hidden behind a mask of confidence. And these kind of cases, it feels, are becoming more and more common. People who manipulate emotions, gaslight their partners, and use them like objects to satisfy their interests and desires without a shred of remorse. Seol still insists that it was impulsive. He clings to that claim even now. But if you really look at what he did, removing the SIM card from her phone, deleting the home app, pretending to be a grieving husband when he was the one who took her life, you have to ask yourself, is any of that something a man does in the heat of the moment? Or was it a carefully staged cover-up for a murder he had planned all along? Even now, Haeyoung's family holds on to one simple hope, that Seol would show even a shred of genuine remorse, that he would acknowledge what he did, apologize, and face the reality of his actions. But instead, he continues to deny, make excuses, and distance himself from the crime. To this day, Seol has never once apologized to the family. He has never bowed his head. He continues to insist that what happened was just a mistake, refusing to take full responsibility for what he did. Even though he has been formally indicted and remains in custody, there has been little sign of true reflection or regret. And so, this case is not yet over. The court has not yet made its final decision. While the outcome remains to be seen, one thing feels clear. Given the seriousness of what happened, the sentence should reflect the full weight of the crime. Cases like this remind us that people capable of serious harm often hide behind ordinary circumstances, and when someone shows signs that they are afraid or trapped, there needs to be stronger systems in place to recognize those warnings and act before it's too late. As per Saw's case, we will have to keep an eye on how the trial proceeds. It will be important to see what judgment is made and whether it fully addresses the nature of what happened. That is all for today.